And a warm welcome to everybody to this wonderful webinar that we're having today on gender in the workplace, difficult conversations for men. Let us know where you're coming from. We're always interested in this vast land. There's been so many different weather phenomenons. We'd love to know where you are and what's the weather like today as we allow everyone to get on board. So a warm welcome to you all. I'm Lisa Sweeney, the CEO of Business and Heels, the team that are proudly working to accelerate gender equity with the Gender Equity Awards. Recalibrate. Let's begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we join today's meeting from wherever you are across our vast and diverse country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Business and Heels acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present. We extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joined here today. And I'd also like to acknowledge that inclusion is not a new concept for our First Nations people. They've been demonstrating this for tens of thousands of years in caring for our country, each other, and putting a real value on the environment. So welcome today to the discussion on gender in the workplace. Now, I'd just like to mention that Equal Pay Day was on August 25th in 2023, and that in 1969, Australian women earned the right to equal pay for equal work. But clearly something's missing, because on average, women in Australia earn less than men, which is obviously the gender pay gap. Equal Pay Day marks the 56 extra days from the end of the financial year that women must work to earn the same average pay. So a report recently came out this last week, which highlighted that 30% of men believe that gender equality and gender pay gap has been achieved. So clearly we've still got a little bit of work to do to get everybody across some of the issues. So gender equity and inclusion creates strong and productive teams that deliver great results. However, in many places, we know that many of you want to do more. And on behalf of your wives, mothers and daughters, you don't want to wait for another generation before things improve. So today, with the emphasis on political correctness, gender fluidity and increasing litigation, many of you are unsure how to best take action. Explaining your lack of know-how is often misconstrued as a lack of support, and so much of this remains undiscussed. So today's discussion will go some way to give you a roadmap, but you can take action to become a better informed and become a male ally to those at Business and Heels. Every membership at $99 also includes that for a woman, so you can start off your allyship. We're excited to acknowledge the 49 finalists who are doing great work on gender equity, who will be celebrated and recognised at Recalibrate, the Gender Equity Awards on the 15th of November. And today, our guests are going to share their experiences and their approach, giving you a roadmap that you can choose to adopt. So please welcome our guests, Dan Poynton, Peter White, and David Walker. So it's lovely to have you all here. Now, our first panelist is Dan Poynton of GippSport. He's the Executive Officer there and has an unwavering commitment to gender equality, and he plays a key role as an ally within GippSport, Gippsland, and more broadly across the Victorian sporting sector. Under Dan's guidance, GippSport has delivered many sector-leading initiatives such as the Balancing the Board program, providing governance, training and mentoring to women aspiring to leadership roles in sport, the Gippsland Girls in Sport Forum, where GippSport brought 40 young women from 16 to 18 years old together to co-design what a supportive and inclusive sport environment should look like for young women, the Changing Gippsland Game Initiative, which supports a network of professional women in sports administration roles, and in partnership with La Trobe Uni's Centre for Sport and Social Impact, delivers the Men as Allies, supporting women and girls in community sport research program. He is known for creating opportunities for women, sponsoring one of his team to participate in the Victorian Government Joan Kerner's Emerging Leaders program, another to attend the International Working Group World Conference on Women in Sport in New Zealand in November 2022, and another to participate in the Office Women in Sport and Recreation's Next Generation Leaders program in 2023. Now, collectively, those achievements led to GippSport being recognised in the 2022 Recalibrate Gender Equity Awards as winning the best SME and the best organisation overall, which is pretty amazing. So welcome, Dan. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
So Dan, the sporting world is known to be male dominated, and you work across a number of boards with very few women members. Can you share with us some of the behaviour you witnessed and what's helped to change this?
Certainly. Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that our sector, the sport world, is experiencing a bit of a wave of change at the moment. And so, more broadly, it's the national conversation. We've just finished the Women's World Cup, where the Matildas dominated the headlines and did amazingly. And certainly what we're trying to do is harness that momentum and energy to sort of push through some change across community sport more broadly. I think it's pretty fair to say that sport's very traditional. And so certainly when you look at a board profile, whether it's with a national body, a state body, or even just your regular local little sporting club, very often the makeup around that board table is your traditional pale, stale male board profile. And certainly, we're in Gippsland, down in regional Victoria. The further out from Melbourne that you get, the more traditional that becomes, the more conservative they become as well. And certainly in regional country footy, if you look at the community level, people are playing for sheep stations. It is the most important thing ever. And so, many of these directors on these boards attach much of their self-worth to holding a board position, the Omeo and District Footy Netball League, or, something like that. So I think one of the big challenges for us is trying to balance, enabling this wave of change and creating a gender profile on these boards that supports a growth in participation for women and girls right through from junior levels right through to the pathway levels. And we're sort of finding that, we're sort of trying to balance out the work by using a carrot and a stick approach. And then along with that, so some really good allyship going, come on, let's go. It's okay to do this. It's not, it's not a risk for you. The pathway's still there. There's no less opportunities for men or boys. We're just about trying to create more opportunities for women. So I think some of the work that you referenced that we've been doing with the Balancing the Board program and, our regional Women in Governance program has been very much about trying to build capacity of women, to enable them to take a leadership position within sport. It's a 12-month program where they are supported around going through some training around foundational governance principles. And then along with that, we balance that with trying to get some really quick wins on the board with clubs about supporting some entry-level participation programs and demonstrating that by having a more diverse board, more diverse voices around the table, that you do actually generally get better outcomes for your club, which I think, holds through to corporate Australia as well. One of the classic examples where, we've been trying to advocate was with AFL Gippsland. So they created just last year a new strategy to engage more women and girls in AFL footy. So created a working group, created a policy document for female football Gippsland, started to implement it and was wondering why it didn't work, and just end up in a conversation with the directors around the AFL Gippsland table, and no women were consulted. There wasn't a woman on the working group. They didn't talk to the clubs. It was just a group of men that were hardcore footy dudes that developed a strategy that they thought would work for women and girls, and surprise, surprise, no women and girls turned up. So I think what we're trying to do is have these conversations at different levels, build capacity in women, build capacity in girls to enable them to do that and provide a really supportive environment around that. And then at the same time, nudge the guys, and in particular, the old, as we say internally, we don't say this externally, so you're all very lucky, the old troglodytes that sit out there in community sport, that, the time for change is now, and it's actually going to make your sport better.
I see. So you're assuming the troglodytes can't get onto Zoom.
Yes, absolutely. I think, there is a digital divide in regional Victoria, Lisa. So, I think if those cave dwellers can stay in their caves, then we'll just drive some good positive change without them. Yeah.
It sounds like you're doing some great work. Now, let me introduce you to our next panellist. Peter White, AM, is the Managing Director of the FBAA and first started as a volunteer with the organisation 2003. Peter's banking and finance career spans over 44 years, covering retail banking, head of private banking, associate director of marketing and distribution investment banking, established Rams Home Loans' first sales office in 1993. Wow. And has run mortgage management businesses, and has had several broking businesses of his own. So in 2016, Peter established and is the current global chairman of the IMBF, which is the International Mortgage Brokers Federation, which is a collaboration of industry associations in 6 countries and is a world's first of its kind. He also sits on the Small Business Association of Australia's advisory board and is a champion and campaigner for mental health issues and the needs of parents and carers of special needs children. Peter was recognised in 2019 at the Queen's Birthday Honours with an AM, the Member of the Order of Australia, for significant services to industry and community. And in 2021 was awarded the Australian Broking Awards as the Industry Thought Leader of the Year. And in 2022, the Wellness Advocate of the Year, and was recognised in the FBAA 2022 Global Top 100 Mortgage Broker Influencers. So, wow, Peter, we're very lucky to have you here.
Thanks, Lisa. I understand why I'm so great. That's one thing I do understand.
Exactly. Now, you've long been a champion for your female team members, providing them with mentoring and sponsorship to help them achieve. Are there any interesting situations that you can share with me where they've been bullied or, and perhaps, you know, that's created a dilemma for you to face?
Yeah, most certainly. So a bit of background, I guess, context to that. The FBAA has always been a sponsor supporting women's advocacy and rights in the marketplace and events and so on they're putting on to help build and support the community there. Except 12 months ago, just a day before International Women's Day, which we celebrate each year, same with International Men's Day. And I said we need to do something different because the conversation in our industry was getting rather, I won't say boring, it's not the right word. It wasn't hitting the nail on the head. It really wasn't dealing with anything of substance. And then we created, prior to it happening by NASA, the Artemis space. Obviously, NASA then went out and did the Artemis mission and that threw a bit of a curveball there. Everything really so we set up Artemis space with a very succinct purpose, and that was to ensure that one day that there was no conversation, and it'd probably be beyond my timeline. But at some point in time, gender inequality needs not to exist. Everybody needs to be on the same plate, treated the same way, paid the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. So that gender balance, gender equality was a part of the mandate and purpose of Artemis. There's a long road to do it, and we understand where the pendulum swings, but that is the goal. And of course, we see these in real life examples, the need for this to get right. And this is where you're asking me before. I've had women who come to me. Obviously, I've been in this industry 1 or 2 years, 4.5 decades, but anyhow. And so there is the thing that I am very warmed by is that people have a solid trust in coming to me with issues and challenges, and they have over quite a few years. And more of recent, there was a matter where a lady came to me where she even gave me the recording of what transpired by a senior person. I won't say an executive, but a senior male in our industry who was basically bullying her to get his way on a matter that was something he wanted to achieve. Put it that way. It wasn't anything untoward. It was business related, but it was completely inappropriate and wrong. And the challenge of the past, it was still the challenge at this point in time, was that my hands were tied. I wasn't given any authority to be able to take it any further, because I most certainly would have dive bombed and tackled it without a problem. But I need consent for that. And without consent, there's only so much you can do. So that was a situation where it was more around, I guess, the mentoring and support for that person to let her know she wasn't on her own, and there was somebody who was genuinely interested in caring for a situation. But the reality was, without consent to do anything, hands are tied. I can't take it anywhere except watch that space very carefully. And so that's probably the most recent matter that's come about, but it's not the first with a very similar undertone to it, and that's just intolerable in my mind in this industry. And we have some women in our industry who are extremely strong and forthright, that particular person had tried other things on them and put back right in his place where he should be. But unfortunately, that's not the majority. So, and that needs to go. That's just absolute garbage. Got to go.
So, Peter, did you come up with any? You mentioned you mentored her a little bit. So, was there anything in particular that helped to address the situation?
I think that the main thing was knowing that there was someone there who was listening, and actually, I'll try and find the right words without swearing. Actually, did give a, you know what, about what was going on, and you know, from a genuine position. It's easy to see through falseness, and I certainly don't come from that position when we're talking about these sort of subjects and matters and issues. So having that genuine support for her, I think, was the thing that was the primary thing. And the underlying tone of what was going on tended to then extinguish itself. It didn't go forward any further. I did make the suggestion, drop my name, that'll shut them up. They don't like it when they know I'm involved.
Well, you know, and as you said, women learning to be able to deal with some of these things is important, and the empathy is important. So some great outcomes from that. So our next panelist is David Walker. He leads sales and relationship management for Lab 49 across the APAC region. David's background has seen him gain insight across 3 broad sectors: social sciences, banking and technology, having worked for major companies like the Royal Bank of Scotland, NAB, Macquarie Group and Tech Mahindra. David holds a double major honours degree in sociology and criminology from Cardiff University. He started his career in criminology, interviewing and counselling violent offenders with drug and alcohol addiction. This foundation in human behaviour and managing difficult conversations has allowed David to successfully navigate the next 20 years of his career across banking and wealth management, building real and meaningful relationships with some of Europe and Australia's leading family offices and corporate executives. Over the years, David has added qualifications across capital markets, insurance, wealth management and banking in both the UK and Australia. But he still sees his most valuable qualification and attributes by far being the ability to connect genuinely, which is what Peter's point was, and passionately to understand the other person. He also enjoys contributing to advisory boards across startups, innovation and diversity, and has been involved in various boards such as the Brunswick Business Incubator, Barriamel First Nations Entrepreneurship, I'm sure I pronounced that badly, Melbourne's Innovation Centre Food Incubator, and West Australia's head of D&I for the Macquarie Group. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for having me. Look, I've really thought long and hard about how I could add to this conversation with you know, a panel of such experience and capability with how do I bring my own kind of background and unique kind of experience. And really what I'd like to focus on, Lisa, is frankly where I've got it wrong. As you mentioned, these are really difficult conversations to have. And so I'm going to be highlighting some of those areas where I did make a mistake. So if a bit of context, if people are thinking, who is this person? He has the emotional intelligence of a stone. I'm purposefully calling out where I've actually got it wrong. So my first example really is, and best practice is very much around dropping the ego or wanting to be the hero in some of these difficult conversations. And the reason for that is, you know, genuine empathy is so super important as us as humans to interact and really be differentiated between the outside group and the inside group. So as Lisa mentioned, my first role out of university was dealing with violent offenders with alcohol problems in the law courts of South Wales. And both men and women between the ages of around 16 and 35 who had been involved in some pretty horrendous situations and had been in and out of the criminal justice system throughout their lives. Now, this was my first job out of uni, and I was incredibly proud, perhaps carrying a bit too much ego. I remember the week before I went out and bought this really nice pinstripe suit. I must have looked like something out of, you know, a mafia kind of Italian movie. but it was important. And I was very much leading of, I'm the expert, I'm up here, you're down here. I had a set of questions to ask these people post they were sentenced. And frankly, I was going to get through that set of questions in that order, irrespective of how the conversation went. And what I was finding in these difficult conversations is I wasn't really getting much genuine feedback. I wasn't developing the rapport. We weren't solving problems and even getting to the heart of the problems together. And which was actually interesting because some of these people I was meeting, I was a similar age. In fact, some of them I went to school with. So if I'd sat next to them in maths class, then why wasn't it that I was developing this rapport and having the ability to have these difficult conversations? And frankly, it goes back to ego. I think when we approach gender inequality, workplace bullying, we need to really ground ourselves that there's a genuine want to help. And it's not about coming in, riding a white horse, solving the problem for someone. You may not have all the answers. And I found once I adopted that approach, dealing with violent offenders, that the suit was left at home. The clipboard was put down, and there was a real connection and genuine want to help as an equal rather than any kind of hierarchy. So that would be my first story of where I got it wrong, is coming in and thinking, I've got this, I'll solve it, I'm experienced. So really changing that approach.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm sure we've all got similar stories as we came out of university. Big learning curve. Now, let's just talk a little bit about quotas. So one of the solutions that is often used in the marketplace to try and level up gender equality has been about quotas. And they have their pros and cons. There's a dramatic shift happening about quotas in sport. So Dan, can you share with us a little bit of your thoughts on this very hot topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly hot topic and flavour of the day in our sector. So as a little bit of history for everybody, back in 2015, the Victorian government did an inquiry into women and girls' participation in sport. And off the back of that inquiry, there were 9 recommendations. One of them was the creation for the Office for Women and Girls in Sport. And the third recommendation out of that report was to mandate gender balance and good governance principles for sporting organisations. And with that was a 40% quota for women on sporting organisations boards. There was a transition plan that was put in place for organisations to work to, but the fundamental and underlying principle was trying to create a lever for change within a sector that was very traditional and very male dominated. So at the time, sort of as all of that work was happening, there was about 40% of organisations in the sports sector that exceeded the quota of 40%. As it stands today, 93% of organisations within the sports sector now meet the mandated gender quota and have 40% women on their boards. I'm really pleased to say that GippSport has exceeded it the whole time, even before the inquiry, which is great. And that was my predecessor. That was not me. I was not in the EO chair at that particular point, but I'll claim it. So I think one of the things that we've seen in certainly within sport is that unfortunately that there's not enough allies that just do the right thing all the time. And so what we're trying to do is nudge and help and encourage that over here, but on this other side of the conversation is try and create levers for change. And what we're doing through sport is trying to drive policy to enable that, to nudge people along. And we found that a quota system within leadership structures within sport has been really effective in doing that. And what is happening in parallel is that we are, as a sector, working through fair access policy at the moment with local governments and sporting organisations as well. So this is around mandating time of use principles for women and girls teams and other policies to support a participation outcome for women and girls as well. So there's multiple different layers that are sort of happening within our sector, and I certainly think that if you can find the right lever for change, if you can find the right ally and the advocate to help do that and have the appropriate conversations, that you will get a really good outcome from that. I certainly acknowledge that, in some sectors, quotas are certainly not as favourable as just having a target. But I think depending on the culture within that particular organisation, you know, if there's no lever for change and you've just got the target, you say, oh yeah, well, we're working to it, but nothing's actually happening. You know, I think we need to try and find a way to nudge it along.
So obviously quotas have worked in your sector.
Certainly within sport and certainly for our organisation, yes.
So Peter, you've got a strong point of view about this as well. Would you like to share your thoughts on quotas versus target and what it means for accelerating gender equity?
Sure. So my views probably aren't shared by everybody, but this is the way I view how we need to get to where we need to land in the future. And that is, there is no gender equality, right? And I guess the underlying issue, and I'm looking at this from my industry perspective, I'm not talking about sports or any other markets, I'm just purely looking at the broking sector, is that, you know, we currently sit 75-25 men to women. It is a heavily male-dominated industry. It always has been. But when we look in financial services more broadly, it's around 53% women, right? So, you know, my views look at the broking sector where it is really flipped. And so what are the issues and challenges there? And the problem I have with quotas is, to me, if somebody said to me, I need you to do something to make up a percentage or to be a number, I'd be smacking them in the head, right? Not happening. Yeah, I think that would be so derogatory, inappropriate. They deserve what they get. That's not the reason, or that shouldn't be the driver, is to make up a number or a statistic or a percentage. To me, in our industry, it's about ensuring there are no barriers to entry. And you mentioned back in those heady days of 1993 and getting Rams up off the ground in those very early days. It was 12 of us back then. God knows how many there are these days. But, you know, we were there, you know, with people going to visit borrowers at their place, their home at night times. And the challenge was that, you know, we got issues in those early days where women were getting harassed and potentially worse, got themselves out of a very difficult situation, because here they are at night time knocking on a stranger's door, going into a house that they don't know what's on the other side of that door. Now, most of the time it was completely fine, but there were cases that came out of that. And so, yeah, we fast forward to today and say, well, these are some of our industry challenges in the enablement of more women to be in broking. And therefore, we need to remove those barriers, those issues. So this is where, strangely, the advent of the pandemic worked out really well, because it forced everybody to do this, to do it with the camera. That took away one of the big barriers and opens up those issues to make sure that that sort of gatepost is not in the way. It still is with some lenders, but it certainly changed the dynamic of our industry and helped to get past one of the barriers that are stopping women from, you know, possibly entering into our industry. And then, you know, when you balance out the back of that and say, well, not every industry is 50-50. Yeah. And so there's also an industry perspective. So look, my view is, if there are no barriers to entry, there is nothing stopping you, it is equal opportunity. And of course, brokers get paid the same. That's got no gender issue with brokers, what they get paid. That doesn't exist. They all get a commission. It's all the same for everybody. Employees are different, but brokers are not. You know, if they aren't there, then the number will land where the number lands, to whatever percentage that is. And that just means that that industry is that way, whatever it is. I would most certainly love it to be significantly more women. Personally, I reckon women make the best salespeople, right? So when they're out there doing their job, they nail it. They do a fantastic job. We just need to encourage more to come in and make sure that we as an industry haven't put barriers in the way that inadvertently stop them from actually coming in.
Well, and I think to your point, the bit about going into people's home and being able now to at least get a sense of who they are will make such a difference, because, I mean, being a mortgage broker is actually quite a lucrative career for many people. And for women, it works around hours. So quite often the hours when they need to get out and meet the people is, you know, a good time to work around families. So
yeah, most certainly. And look, it does work as a business, as an industry, extremely well for working mums, if I can box it that way. And so, well, you know, if a lady does have kids and so on, and she wants to be in this industry, you control the time slots. So yeah, it works really well for them.
So, you know, potentially we should see a dramatic shift in that, given that there's a lot in the rest of finance.
Yeah, most certainly, I would think so. Yeah, as long as those barriers aren't there, which I can't think of any that are left, to be honest with you, from the past. So it's a matter of time and encouragement and welcoming.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, let's have another interesting dig into David's history. And, you know, being a leader often has interesting learning curves, and not every conversation do you handle perfectly. David, did you have an example of that you want to share with us?
Sure. Yeah. Look, the next example really is really just being mindful of your emotions. And there's probably a whole webinar that we could do on the human brain and fight and flight and friend and foe and just the seemingly insignificant things which actually put someone into what's called an amygdala hijack, where someone gets a lot more emotional. And my example is really about when that happened to me. I think it's really important to help guide some of our male allies if they are in one of these difficult conversations, and frankly, if they're the ones being called out. How do you handle it? So for a number of years, I worked in a large investment house where part of my role nationally was to actually distribute some of the kind of lucrative investment deals or private banking deals that were coming in to the bank. And bankers in general are quite competitive and quite kind of focused around sales. And what was called out by one of my colleagues was actually that I was taking the lucrative larger deals and passing them to a male colleague, and my female colleague called that out and felt that I was being unfair. Now, I mentioned about recognizing your own emotions, and I think that's really important generally in life. But actually having an ability to slow down and think about that and pause, if something like that is called out, for me, it actually really touched a nerve around my values around fairness and inclusion. So it's okay to actually pause and say, look, I'll need a minute just to process that, or can I come back to you? Let me take on the feedback you've given. Now, what I did early on in my career was I really matched that with facts and my view. And this is my opinion, and I'm really going to get it across. From my perspective, it was very much around in financial services, you have to have certain qualifications in different asset classes, whether you're talking about shares or fixed income and things. And this particular individual didn't have a number of those qualifications. But frankly, that was by far one of the worst approaches I could take, really, was to ignore the underlying emotion and sentiment and counter it with a very strong view of my own, with, no, this is the reason. So I think for anyone who finds themselves in that situation, pausing, really kind of thinking about empathy and why is this person coming across? Let's dig into this rather than to counter it straight away. Asking some broad questions. For me, one of the things that I like to do to overcome that emotional response is get out of the office and have a conversation with someone while walking. I find the walking and the talking piece for me slows me down, gets me out of that amygdala kind of primitive brain, and can understand the other person's view rather than kind of jumping straight to actually, you know, how dare you, this is my view. So I just wanted to share that, and hopefully that helps to resonate or helps as a bit of a guidance on how not to do it.
Okay, so we take the emotional connection and we don't argue with logic. At least
just pausing and hearing the other person's view rather than jumping straight back in and saying, well, actually, no, here's my counter. Because inevitably, you know, human beings are very complex individuals, and you know, words aren't perhaps even the best way to communicate sometimes. So just having that kind of methodology and slowness to think about it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for sharing with that. Dan, over the course of your career, you've had many difficult conversations. Can you share with us one that you wish you'd handled better?
Certainly. And even just listening to my colleagues just talk just now, I almost feel like I want to get into a difficult conversation with Peter right now about the merits of quotas versus targets, you know, because I think certainly what we've identified in sport, you know, that, yeah, I absolutely acknowledge all of the points that Peter put forward. But what we have seen with sport is that that just doesn't result in the outcome that we're seeking for. There's not enough people that are actively taking the time and effort to make that the case, to remove the barriers, and that within our sector, you know, it's the fundamental equity versus equality conversation, that, you know, that equality perspective where everybody has equal chance, the barriers are all removed. That's only true if everybody's starting from the same position. And certainly in our sector, that is not the case. There are historical systems, structures, policies that just mean that for whatever reason, women are disadvantaged, even though that process, that opportunity may be available to them. There's all of these hidden barriers that we're just not aware of. So I'd be fascinated to know if a full gender impact assessment had been done on the brokerage sector and all of that type of stuff to remove all of the barriers that Peter spoke about, because, yeah, I find that really interesting.
That's an easy one to
Agree
answer.
with the principle.
The answer is no, that hasn't been done, but I'd like to do it.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, because, you know, what I guess, and I don't know this obviously because I don't play in your world, Peter, what I guess is that there may be many other hidden barriers that, you know, are just unidentified, that are stopping an appropriate representation of women, you know, to go through in that, because that's certainly something that we've been trying to address through our work.
That very well could be the case. I mean, we've identified a lot and pulled those apart, but you know, it's a syndrome where it's the insider looking inside. So having an outsider's perspective, let's talk about that. We'll talk later.
Happy to. That would be fantastic. So there you go, Lisa. What about a challenging conversation? Perfect. Live on air for you. So,
Well, I love it, because this is how we progress, right? Because
yeah,
some of this is solved in other industries, and why reinvent the wheel if there are great processes and systems that we can all adopt, and it'll be faster for everyone. Let's go with it. Anyway, back to your challenging conversation.
yeah. Well, look, I think, you know, and very similar to David as well, you know, I think one of the most simple ones that I'll put forward, because I've spoken a lot about broader sector stuff, and acknowledging, you know, David's comment right at the start is not pretending to come in that I have all of the answers, is that, you know, even though I think our organisation and myself as a sports administrator is very well progressed, you know, that it's okay to still make mistakes, and that mistakes will still happen. And, you know, even, you know, just recently we've had a little bit of staff churn. We've had some young women that we put a lot of time and effort into be headhunted by other organisations. And so whilst it's absolutely a slap on the cheek, you know, you've got to take it as a compliment that you can develop people to a point that they want to go on. And for one of the young women that's just, you know, we've facilitated her exit and transition over to this other organisation, you know, was doing the exit interview process and going through what has been our standard process for some time, you know, sent the documentation through, offered her the opportunity to respond to the surveys, and then set up a time to talk through it. And then one of the colleagues here in the office just sort of nudged me and just sort of said, do you have any idea of the power imbalance of that dynamic? You know, you're in the peak of your career, you're the executive officer, she's a 24-year-old young woman who's just been identified on this new career path, which is really exciting for her. You know, just have a think about that power imbalance, and, you know, what do you think the chances are that it's going to be a genuine, open, honest conversation in that dynamic, even though often, you know, people have got no reason to hold back generally in an exit interview because you're on your way out the door. So, you know, it was an eye-opener for me that, you know, that a system and a process that we've had in place as an organisation that is trying really hard, you know, in this space, is still able to just, you know, accidentally, no ill-intended purpose or anything, just overlooked that power imbalance. So, you know, what we're able to quickly do from there is sort of re-go through, check in with her, you know, provide her the opportunity to have input into who she might want to have the exit interview conversation with, what the environment might be like to enable her to provide feedback on her experience as an employee with us as an organisation. And we had a really great conversation. And, you know, she took the opportunity to invite a colleague in with her, and we had a three-way conversation through that process. So, you know, I think that was really interesting for me, you know, to go through that process.
Nice. And no doubt you'll adopt that going forward.
Absolutely. Yes.
Similarly, Peter, I'm sure you've had a number of difficult situations. Is there one that you wished you handled better, and maybe some of the learnings you've taken from it?
I was just thinking about that, and there really haven't been issues that we haven't been able to deal with. I mean, the industry, people actually put the blocks on us doing more to actually see whether or not we're going to handle it well or not. All we could do is provide support because no one really wanted to give consent to progress anything forward. And that, I guess, is one of the key things for us as an industry at some point in time. To resolve issues, those things have to be dealt with appropriately. So, there's probably, all of them probably could have been dealt with better, but unfortunately they were unable to be progressed to deal with them better. So it's a bit challenging from that point of view. And there's not one that I would sit back and say, well, gee, I wish I did that differently. More though, I wish I could have completed those things and solved the issues.
Yeah, interesting. And maybe there's even an opportunity, I guess, as the broader employee laws come in and with WorkSafe to be able to address some of the things that make people then not be psychologically safe, which I think will be an interesting thing to unpack once that comes through. So let's move on to David. One of the lessons that you've learned is not to jump to solutions, which is a key behaviour of most senior leaders because we like solving problems and doing it quickly. So can you share us why you think this and how you think it can improve gender equity?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. And the example I want to share with you isn't necessarily a gender inequality example, but I think when we talk about having these difficult conversations, and they are difficult, and I think any conversation this serious, they are going to be difficult, but it's really around not getting hung up around a specific outcome. I think you could take this methodology for lots of things, career advice. If you pinpoint, I want this as an outcome, then ultimately that's setting up for disappointment. So even having the discussion and going in the direction and getting awareness, it may not be the exact outcome that you've aimed for, but going in that kind of broad area is progress in itself, I think. So my example is a few years ago, I had a colleague in a board setting that was quite aggressive and stood up and was quite confrontational. Now, I think the interesting thing about the human dynamic, and especially males, we've almost been institutionalized in this Hollywoodization of, the hero and the villain, who's going to win, who's going to lose. And there's some fascinating, for the listeners, there's some fascinating work with Simon Sinek around those people who take an infinite game mindset versus a finite, and the benefits of that. Nobody wins in life, nobody loses. Ultimately, everyone ends at the same point. So the way I kind of learned from that experience with that individual was, once again, my similar methodology of let's get out of the environment, let's go for a walk. And rather than being focused on, I want as an outcome from this difficult conversation, I want an apology. Like that ultimately sets me up then for a very closed conversation where I'm solely focused on that and perhaps missing something else. So I approached it far more broadly around, hey, what was happening this morning? And really just that broad, open-ended question and being comfortable in the silence, in the pause, which I think is another good tip for a difficult conversation. Elicited a whole heap of other things that were going on with that individual. So look, I guess in summary, if you do find yourself in a conversation which is emotional and tough, digest it, think about where you want to go as a general direction, rather than being hung up on a timeline or a finite kind of outcome.
Yeah, really great advice there, David. Thank you. So it's been a fabulous discussion. We've covered a lot of ground across a lot of industries. Can we ask each of you to share with us maybe 3 tips for men wanting to be more inclusive? So maybe we'll start with you, Dan. What are your 3 tips?
Sure, no problem. I'll take this opportunity just to do a little plug for the research piece that you mentioned right back at the start of the webinar in my bio. So we were really fortunate to work with La Trobe University Centre of Sport and Social Impact, and did a research piece around men as allies, around supporting women and girls in community sports. So that was a fascinating project. Worked with an exceptional colleague, Professor Dr. Erica Randall. She's awesome. But I think what we certainly identified through that project, and as advice to everybody here, this isn't rocket science. It's really not. It's pretty simple when you come to it. And I think fundamentally, certainly for any men that are listening, number one is that the easiest thing is just to genuinely value and act for gender equality. You need to acknowledge that the problem is there and we need to do something about it. And, those things that we do can be really quite simple. It doesn't have to be, this massive piece of work. So that's probably the first thing. Within the research, we've created a bit of a framework for community sport administrators, which I think, probably has an application across sectors and across industry. So if people wanted to Google it, the Men as Allies Supporting Women and Girls in Community Sport Research, it's on the Change Our Game website. Along with that, certainly within sport, it's volunteer in non-traditional men's roles, so go and stand in the canteen for half an hour just to do your role. Do be the uniform coordinator, within our workplaces, help organise the morning tea, bits and pieces like that, actively take steps to break down these traditional gender stereotypes. And then probably thirdly is just to genuinely listen and respect the women and girls that are our colleagues. So I think they're probably my most three simple ones, Lisa, and were the three that came across most strongly in the research as effective and simple for men to do.
Wonderful. I love it. Peter, what are your three tips?
I think for the men in our industry, and being very specific to that, they need to, we'll go back to principally what I was saying, make sure that they remove any barriers that they're putting in front of women to be able to progress to being a part of our sector. And then to take a leaf out of Dan's book, for us as an industry to deep dive onto what is it we're missing and understand that more closely. And as Dan was talking about it, and actually there's a couple of areas that came to my mind in the business lending sector where they really need to get it together. And at the same token, with, I guess, the third point to men in our game is that they need to be genuinely empathetic to what's going on and generally trying to get that balance right to wherever that balance lands, from my point of view. And there's so many people that have got enormous egos in our industry. They need to park that and actually be very genuine and receptive to what's going on.
Great, thank you. And David, what are your three?
Yeah, look, I think there's mirrors a little bit of what the other panel have called out. Maybe first of all, it's a bit of an invite. If anyone is struggling to have the conversation, I'm more than amenable. I'm on LinkedIn, and please contact. I guess with a caveat of a couple of things. One, to reference the first point, I don't know all the answers, and I'm not the expert at this, but would welcome having a chat if anyone does find themselves in that situation. So my advice probably comes through in 3 points based around that. But first of all, I guess remember to catch yourself if you're getting caught up as the savior of the moment in some of these difficult conversations. What would be signs of that? I guess signs would be you start taking on the emotion, or even escalating the emotion of the situation, and perhaps you find yourself or catch yourself talking at a person rather than talking with a person for some of these difficult conversations. Secondly, as I mentioned, it's okay not to know the answer or how to fix this. I think if you take that pressure off yourself, first of all, and as I mentioned before, don't set yourself up on a finite outcome, acknowledging sometimes it's new to you and we're going to fix this together, or we're going to talk about this together. Sometimes you're not even being asked to solve it. I think we jump to that. I'll own this. Sometimes it's just listening. And lastly, one of the things that I've always been kind of keen on highlighting throughout my career is, as Peter mentioned, leaving your ego at the door, but really it's around, actually, a lot of people want to be judged by their intent of where rather actually you should be judged by your actions. So just be mindful of to what extent are you trying to help, or to what extent do you want to be seen as helping. So yeah, very much it's human nature really to want to be judged by intent, but ultimately it's outcomes.
Fabulous advice. Well, you've heard it from the experts. If you want to be part of accelerating gender equity, you need to take some action. Sitting on the sidelines won't help. Don't be afraid of difficult conversations, and hopefully through some of these great examples, you've now got your own ideas on how to handle things, or you might want to reach out to David. Remember, you can take action to become better informed and to become a male ally to those at Business and Heels through our membership. And every membership of $99 also includes one for a woman. I want to give a huge thank you to Dan Poynton, Peter White, and David Walker. Thank you very much. And with that, it's a wrap.